Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers for May 10th, 2018. All managers are present. Is there a member of the public who wishes to address the board on a matter that is not on the agenda? See no hands. May I have a motion to approve the agenda? Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have on our consent agenda this evening approval of the minutes of April 26th, 2018 board meeting, and one additional consent item, which is Resolution 18-046, authorization to transfer $171,155.81 from the 325 Blake Road capital account to the 325 Blake Road operations account, requested by Michael Heyman. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Rognus, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Shackleton, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. President's report. I have attended 2 meetings or events since the last board meeting. At invitation from Commissioner McLaughlin, we went to his office for a discussion of the South Minneapolis water issues around Lake Nokomis and Lake Hiawatha. Mr. Whisker, Ms. Schaufler, Katrina Kessler from the city of Minneapolis, and 2 Hennepin County Environment and Energy staff were also there. So we had a rundown of the some of the problems, the different agencies involved at local and state level and their various roles. So it was a good informative meeting, I think, for him. And earlier this week, of course, the Joint Working Group met to interview the 3 finalists for developer for 325 Blake Road, and that will be coming before the board with that group's recommendation on the 24th, 2 weeks from now. Manager Loftus, Operations and Programs Committee report.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have anything to report other than thank you each for attending and experiencing it firsthand.
Okay, thank you.
We made it through all the agenda items.
Citizens Advisory Committee meeting report, Manager Olson.
Yes, last night the Citizens Advisory Committee had presentations about the Arden Park updates as what we're going to be doing throughout the summer. Also, 325 Blake Road discussions were centered around that. They also wanted details on the role that the MCWB played in the Highway 101 Bushway Road project and the Highway 12 Wayzata Boulevard near Long Lake project. There was a question, they understood the answers, but they said in the future they would like to get a really good, strong understanding of the focal geography, and then how, when we're working in those focal geographies, are we responsive to everything else in the watershed? So they don't have that quite digested yet, and so we'll have to address that. Projects along the Minnehaha Creek in South Minneapolis having to do with the FEMA repairs were also discussed, as well as the other projects that are going on. And finally, the CAC bylaws, they haven't been updated since 2014, and so they're going to take a crack at doing that. They had some introductory discussions, and then they'll take that on as a committee later. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other, Manager Becker?
Manager Olson, based on your experience with the Citizens Advisory Committee and their question about the focal areas, would it be worthwhile having a brief primer on the strategic plan and the way it treats those scheduled?
I think they'd be outstanding.
Can we do that?
We can do that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because not only would they understand, they'd support it better. So, good idea.
Were there other meetings or events managers would like to report on? Thank you. The upcoming meeting and event schedule is printed in the agenda, including the Citizens Advisory Committee on June 13th, with Manager Loftus as the board's liaison that evening. We'll move to item 10.1, which is permit 18-162 for 1,000, how do you say those words? 19700 Manor Road in Deep Haven, and we have Catherine Sylvia. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you, President White, managers. To answer your question, I've just been reading every single number out loud and not trying to combine them.
Thank you.
So I run into similar. issue.
19700.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
19,700.
But there's that.
Yep. President White, managers, tonight I'm presenting permit 18-162. It's a single-family home construction located at 19700 Manor Road in the city of Deep Haven. This project does not require a variance or exception from the district's rules. During the public comment period, it was requested by a member of the public to be considered by the Board of Managers because the neighboring resident had a concern for the effect that the increase in hardcover would have on their property. They were concerned of an adverse effect from potentially bouncing the wetland that's located on their property. So I'm just going to show you quickly here on the map. The property in question is outlined in blue. That's 19700. They're increasing impervious surface by 6,253 square feet, and the wetland drains north to the adjoining property to the other wetland outlined in red. And so the district does not regulate change in impervious surface on a single-family home basis. But to address these concerns, we did conduct a conservative model to estimate any change that would happen to the wetland based on the increase in impervious. And during a 100-year flood event, it was estimated that there would be a bounce of 0.8 inches, which is less than 1/10 of a foot. And so this information was provided to the resident and also put into context that the model is very conservative. It also doesn't account for on-the-ground conditions such as direction or rate of flow or infiltration capability of the rest of the surface. And so it's much likely to be lower than that and not noticeable or negligible.
When you say conservative, would I think aggressive, like in the sense that all water will flow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so assuming that the wetland is full and the full volume of water off the impervious is going to go straight on top of that wetland, and the wetland doesn't have an outlet, which it does have an outlet. So this information was provided to the resident, and just through correspondence today, their concerns were adequately addressed. However, the request for the meeting still stands. They are not present this evening. And so the permit does meet the district's rules as applicable. They've provided a standard erosion control plan that meets our erosion control rules, and they have provided the required amount of buffer to the wetland pertinent to the management class. And so staff recommends approval of the permit at this time.
Motion for Manager Shackleton. Is there a second?
Second.
From Manager Becker. Any discussion or further questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thanks.
The next item, item 10.2, is permit 18-002, the Marks subdivision, and we have Elizabeth Showalter.
Thank you, President White, managers. Moment. So I'm presenting tonight on permit 18-002, which is the Mark subdivision, which I believe you should be familiar with, as Laura has been working with the property owner for quite some time in negotiating a conservation easement. I'll begin with background and go into the rule triggers, and then variance, which is the reason why you're considering this permit tonight, and then a staff recommendation. So this permit, this property is in the far northern portion of the district. It's about 90 acres, and about 68 of those will be held by a conservation easement by the district. The site drains north to School Lake, or the lake that the residents call School Lake. The DNR has different names for these bodies of water. And then south to Swamp Lake, which is a large public water wetland. And then both of those drain downstream to Wolfsfeld Lake and eventually into Long Lake. These are the existing conditions on the property. The homeowner has pretty extensive gardens in addition to his single-family home. That home is proposed to stay in place under the subdivision. At this time, the applicant is proposing to construct, to widen the existing driveway into a full-width road to meet city requirements, and then subdivide the property, creating 5 new home sites. And so I'll be talking about both elements of that, the proposed road and then a conceptual plan for those single-family homes. So first, with the proposed road, the applicant provided an erosion control plan for the main road and the associated storm basins. The plan includes silt fence, and they'll be using the existing drive apron as their construction entrance. Erosion control for the single-family homes was not included in the plans and will be provided under separate permits for each home. The stormwater management rule requires phosphorus rate and volume controls are met for the new impervious area. The proposed main road will be treated with 2 biofiltration basins that are sized to meet the district's phosphorus rate and volume controls. And you can see those circled in blue. Since the locations and sizes of the homes are currently unknown, the proposed treatment for the single-family homes is conceptual and may change if the homes differ from the concept design. Stormwater modeling was conducted based on the estimated hardcover for the lots, and the plans include a standard detail for the design of the rain gardens, and the required volume is provided in the modeling conducted, which is in the permit file. When the homes are proposed, through the review of the permits for erosion control, staff will also review the homes for compliance with the stormwater plans for the subdivision. If the proposed homes exceed the hardcover included in the modeling or are not graded to direct drainage to the proposed rain garden locations, amendments to the plans and permit will be needed. Since the final locations are unknown, the applicant did not provide soil borings for the basin locations, which will be needed with the permitting for the single-family homes. The homes will also be required to demonstrate 2 feet of freeboard between the 100-year high water elevation and between the 100-year high water elevation of those basins and the low opening to the homes. There are 9 wetlands on the property, which will provide a fantastic resource for the conservation easement. And they're shown shaded here on the wetland delineation. Wetland buffers are provided on 5 of the wetlands in accordance with the rule, and the other 4 wetlands are the subject of the variance. Some buffer averaging was employed to fit around site constraints by providing less than the required buffer in some areas and compensating with additional elsewhere, or compensation for trails that are located in the buffer. Buffers on all but 1 wetland will be established with the subdivision and conservation easement. The 1 wetland circled here is a little more unique. The applicant owns the existing home and intends to retain lot 5, which has this open water wetland on it. He intends to retain that with his gardens until he sells the house. And so the applicant has requested to delay implementation of the buffer until disturbance is actually proposed on this lot. The wetland is located entirely within 1 private lot, unlike the other wetlands, which are in outlots or cross lot lines, making that a feasible alternative. So the final 4 wetlands are the subject of the variance. The variance and exception rule outlines a number of criteria for granting a variance. Those are that it's due to special conditions inherent to the property, a hardship that wasn't created by the applicant. The variance won't be a convenience, just a convenience, and that there's no feasible or prudent alternative, and granting the variance will not be contrary to the intent of the rule. And those 2 areas circled in red are the 2 subjects of the variance. So first I'm going to talk about the one for the main road, which is this more southerly one. And so the applicant has applied for the variance for the minimum buffer width requirement when employing buffer averaging. So in those cases, they need to meet 50% of the required buffer, and so they are unable to do that. Due to the large number of wetlands on the property, access to the upland areas is severely limited. And alternative road and driveway locations would not be able to meet the buffer requirements either. Additionally, by utilizing existing corridors, tree removal and disturbance of natural areas is limited. So first on the driveway, to meet city code, the existing driveway needs to be widened to accommodate emergency vehicles. The first shortfall is on wetland B on the south side of the road. That wetland is a preserve, which corresponds to a 75-foot buffer requirement. Under buffer averaging, 50% of the width becomes 37.5 feet, and 20 feet is proposed at the narrowest point, resulting in a 17.5-foot shortfall. The next wetland is on the north side. That's wetland J. The wetland is a small managed 3 wetland. It's required to have a 10-foot buffer, a 20-foot buffer with a 10-foot minimum, and they're providing 8 feet, which is a 2 feet shortfall. To make up for the loss in buffer area, additional buffer is proposed on wetland B, which is hydrologically connected to wetland J and is a higher quality wetland than the smaller one. So moving over to the other driveway, to provide access to Lot 2, Block 2, a driveway is proposed in the current trail corridor. There's wetland F on the south side, which is a managed 2 corresponding to a 30-foot buffer with a 15-foot minimum and 3 feet provided at the narrowest point. Then on the north side, there is a manage 1 wetland with a 40-foot buffer requirement, 20-foot minimum, and 9 feet provided at the narrowest point. Additional buffer in this case is provided on wetland E, which is similar to the previous wetland. It's hydrologically connected through a culvert, and it's a higher quality wetland than the wetland F. All of the rule criteria are met aside from the variances which are before you today. So staff recommends approval of the permit subject to the conditions in the permit report, which are securing an NPDES permit, identification of a responsible contractor, maintenance declaration, financial assurance, and reimbursement. Thank you.
We have a motion to approve permit 18002.
Madam President,
Yes.
typically, I think our recommendation is you take separate action first on the variance with
you.
specific findings,
Okay.
and then we'll deal with the permit. I have a comment about the permit as well.
Okay. And then as we discuss it, and we'll keep in mind that there is a further item related to this property at 11.2, which is the conservation easement. So may I have a motion to approve the resolution with the reasons stipulated in the report?
So moved.
Manager Miller has moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus. Now, questions or discussions on the variance? Manager Miller.
A lot of numbers and a lot of complex engineering shown on there that I couldn't follow exactly where it all fitted. But the net result, is there any additional runoff from this property with this development that impacts Long Lake at all?
There are slight, thank you, Manager Miller and President White. There are slight increases in the bounce and inundation for a few of the wetlands that are within the bounce and inundation criteria of the rule. And between the site and Long Lake, there's quite a lot of distance. There's Wolfsfeld Lake in between. School Lake is a fairly large water body, so I think any downstream impact would be pretty limited.
Is there any impact on Wolfsville Lake?
Not any anticipated by engineering.
I'm going to call on engineer Mr. Meehan.
Manager Miller, through the implementation of the stormwater best management practices, there will be an improvement in the reduction in phosphorus leaving the site. So by implementing the district's rules, the sites will leave the water in a better condition than what it was before.
Is there more water leaving?
There'll be more water on an annual basis.
There would be what?
There'll be more water on an annual basis.
But cleaner water.
The cleaner.
Are there other questions concerning the variance? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Now, with that variance, is there a motion to approve permit 18-002?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Shackleton?
Madam President,
Yes.
I just wanted to note in the recommended conditions for the permit, Ms. Schwalter has given a really thorough description of the challenge of the timing here, where there's an initial work that's done and then future work on the home sites. And in fact, with this permit, you are approving permit requirements for the work to be done on those future home sites based on modeled conditions. And if, when the individual erosion control applications come in, you detect a change, then there'll be stormwater requirements that would change accordingly. I just want to make sure that the language of the permit conditions that you're approving state that. And so I would ask in your motion that that language be added among the permit conditions.
So moved.
Manager Shackleton?
Second.
Agreeable. Any further questions or discussion?
I do have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned that there, in each case of the variances, there's an impacted wetland and there's a linked wetland that's, or a separate wetland that's smaller and linked hydrologically. Given that there's greater volume of water being sent downstream under this scenario, is the linkage sufficiently large to manage a higher volume of water than what currently exists? Is my question in the right ballpark? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Manager Shackleton. First, I just want to clarify that the impact isn't to the wetlands, it's to the wetland buffers. And so in both cases, they're connected through equalizer culverts. So really, the smaller wetlands and the larger wetlands were previously one wetland, and when they came through with a road, back in the days when you could just impact wetlands whenever you wanted, a road was built and then a culvert was placed underneath. So they're really still one water resource.
I guess my question comes down to what size culverts are they, and will they impound water upstream and either degrade one faster than the other? I mean, I understand the rules about the buffer, and I'm just going to work my way downstream.
Yeah, so since they were not proposing replacement of those culverts, we were not reviewing it under the water body crossings and structures rule, but I believe that engineering did review them to make sure that there wouldn't be any, with the bounce and inundation requirements.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Meehan?
Try this. Here, let's see if I can engineer the microphone. Manager Shackleton, is part of the rate control that ensures that the bounce and inundation, while there is a volume increase, it's metered off as far as the wetlands, so the downstream impacts are mitigated through the site and through the wetlands. So the culverts that leave downstream
I
will
mean,
be.
between the two wetlands, because
Yep.
in both variances, there was a smaller wetland that, if I understood correctly, was going to be the receiving wetland, and then there's the larger one.
Yep. So that is part of managing the bounce within that equalizer pipe. It manages how both of them. So when we look at the site or look at the wetland, that equalization is taken into account when we look at how the wetland equalizes.
So you think, because I'm obtuse right now,
No.
the pipes are sized large enough
Yes.
to manage the volume increase?
Yes, adequately sized, absolutely.
Thank you.
And this is just changing, this is about buffer, not about changing the
Yep.
dimension
Mhm.
of wetland.
Correct.
Capacity. is the
Yep.
word.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Showalter. Mr. Meehan?
Madam President, that vote would have been on the Miller-Shackleton amendment, and so now you have the main motion.
Thank you. All right. As amended, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for keeping us on the straight and narrow there. The next item is Resolution 18-047, which is an authorization to submit comments to the MPCA regarding draft construction stormwater permits. Ms. Showalter.
Thank you, President White, managers. So I'm going to briefly explain why this is something that we are providing comments on, a brief explanation of the comments, and hopefully clarifying some of the more technical elements from the materials that you received, and then clarifying exactly what it is that we're asking for approval on tonight. So the construction stormwater permit is the statewide permit for erosion control and permanent stormwater management. It has relatively high thresholds in comparison to district rules, but many of the projects that the permitting department sees do also require permits through this program. So it's a federal program that's implemented by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and the permit expires every 5 years. So it's due to expire in August. And so as a part of renewing that permit, the PCA has issued a public comment period. So engineering and staff have coordinated on developing a few comments related to that, particularly related to the permanent stormwater management and how those interact with the district rules and how we plan our capital projects. So the first comment is related to the drinking water supply management areas and suitability of infiltration. So I'm just going to briefly walk through what these areas that are prohibited for infiltration are. So if you look at the district, I'm going to first bring up the wellhead protection areas, which are shaded in green. So each municipality that has public drinking water supply develops a wellhead protection plan. And within each of the wellhead protection areas, there are emergency response areas, which are the solid line areas. So those inner wellhead areas are the areas that the PCA is proposing to prohibit infiltration. Also included in the wellhead protection plans is drinking water vulnerability. So the areas in red are the high vulnerability areas. So all of the orange and yellow are either low or moderate, and infiltration in those areas would be permitted. So if we overlay those two, we can see that a large portion of the district does fall within these areas, particularly in Edina. There's a large number of emergency response areas that are outside of the high vulnerability areas. So if we zoom in a bit into the urban corridor, under the district's comments, which propose to change the infiltration requirements from prohibited in emergency response areas and in the high vulnerability areas, the district is proposing language that would only prohibit it in the overlap between the two, which would mean that just the small portion of Richfield that has overlap between the red and the gray areas would be prohibited for infiltration, and the large portions of Edina that have moderate or low vulnerability within the emergency response areas would allow for infiltration. We're also proposing some changes to the hierarchy of permanent stormwater treatment because the district has invested significantly in regional stormwater treatment and believes that it's an important regulatory tool. And so we are also proposing to make some flexibility in the sequencing requirements to allow for regional treatment in place of on-site treatment under some circumstances that the PCA does not currently allow. So staff is currently coordinating with legal on these comments, working on a few items to address. The comments that were provided in the packet are materially will be mostly the same as what ends up being submitted to the PCA. So we're asking for the board to authorize the administrator to make comments which will not exceed the scope of what is currently proposed. And then staff will continue to coordinate with legal to work out the phrasing on some of the issues.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Manager Shekel, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Becker, questions for Ms. Showalter? So were you saying that the letter attached may not be exactly as sent? Okay, I want to be sure I understood correctly. Manager Miller.
There's boundary in black and there's a boundary in red. What's the...
Yeah, thank you, Manager Miller. The boundary in red is our legal boundary, and the boundary in black is our hydrologic boundary. So there is, in this area, there's a large difference between our hydrologic and legal boundary, which is something that staff is aware of and will hopefully eventually address through a boundary change.
What's it about? What has any sense for why that discrepancy exists? And I'm looking at the airport and I can envision a culvert creating that boundary difference.
Is it because of subdivision of property?
Manager Shackleton, managers. The reason the boundary is the way it is this basin here is a landlocked basin, and emergency pumping, I believe, when it was originally set up, would go to the north, which is why it got included in the hydrologic boundary. If I recall right now, it gets moved to the south down the 494 corridor and then out to the Minnesota River. So that's the main difference between the two.
So it won't naturally drain. It unnaturally drains.
Unnaturally.
It's like our 35W zigzag up there.
Yeah. That's exactly it.
It's a big portion of our.
Wow. So is it, let me just say that back to you. That, there's no outlet for the water there?
Not a natural.
Not a natural outlet.
There's a pump
But
out.
but if the water were to get, if it was not pumped and the water were to get high enough, it would flow towards the creek in some capacity.
If it, yes, an extreme situation, it would eventually work.
But that's,
And it's treated much like the 35W corridor because of the pumping. And is that, okay.
yeah.
So we wouldn't really have a leg to stand on if we wanted to attempt to reclaim that. Correct?
Are there other questions or need for clarification? All those in favor of adopting the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Meehan. We'll move to item 11.2, which is Resolution 18-048. It is a long statement. I'm not going to say it because I know you're going to say it. We have Laura Damjancic.
Good evening, President White, managers. Tonight, staff is seeking authorization to execute the School Lake Preserve Conservation Easement, MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with the City of Medina for enforcement of that easement, and an indemnification agreement with the City of Medina for the city's installation and construction and maintenance of public trails that will be through the conservation easement. Some details on the conservation easement itself. It will be a 70-acre conservation easement within a conservation design plan unit development of 6 lots. It's generally here in the district. This is Painter Creek and Watershed. The Marks property is here, just southwest of School Lake. Baker National Golf Course is to the west here, and Baker Park is then to the south. The conservation areas will be held in outlets, put in outlets, and owned by the adjacent lot owners. And then the individual property owners will form an HOA to oversee the long-term management and maintenance, which will be guided by a land stewardship plan. The conservation areas are shown in the site plan in green, yellow, and the deeper blue along the School Lake shoreline. The shoreline is 1,100 feet long within the conservation easement. The easement also includes 41 acres of wetlands and 27 acres of uplands. As I said, the Homeowners Association will oversee the long-term management of the conservation area, and that management will be guided by a land stewardship plan, which was created in conjunction with the easement. The land stewardship plan details how the easement areas are to be managed over time, and also details how the management is to be funded by the HOA. The conservation areas include a tamarack swamp, a high-quality tamarack swamp, restored upland prairie as well, and small wetlands among a maple oak basswood forest. Through its role as easement holder, the district has an obligation to inspect the conservation easement and create reports for the Homeowners Association that will detail needed management, which must be performed within that growing season using the HOA funding. If management is not completed, the district can go in and perform the work, and the city will coordinate to assess those costs to the Homeowners Association. The land stewardship plan, created as a supplement to the easement, specifies ongoing management focused in areas within the easement that there has been management in the past and that will need maintenance to be kept up. or areas that are degraded and will benefit from ongoing management. The semi-annual inspections will also identify easement violations, and in this case, the HOA will be notified if there are easement violations within the conservation easement area, and the fee owner will be required to correct those violations. If the fee owner fails to comply with those corrections, the city or the district can enter and correct, and the city can assess the fee owner for the violation, inspection, and follow-up and correction of the violations. This coordination is between the City of Medina and the Watershed District and is formalized in the Memorandum of Understanding that staff is seeking authorization to execute tonight. The MOU states that the district has the ability and responsibility and authority to monitor the conservation easement for compliance with the easement, and that the city and district will coordinate to enforce the easement over time, and that the city may undertake compliance and enforcement of the easement itself independently. There are a number of benefits to the district for holding the conservation easement. First, the easement is part of a larger corridor of conservation land. The district currently holds a 35-acre easement just north of the Merck's property on School Lake, which we refer to as the Petrucci easement. And taking a larger look at this map here, the Merck's property is kind of the northmost property within a larger conservation corridor with Baker Park to the west, the Deer Hill Preserve Conservation Easement and the Reckelbacher property to the east of that property, Wolfsfeld Wood Scientific and Natural Area to the east, and then district-held easements and district-owned property within South Katrina Marsh and also the Pioneer Marsh subwatersheds. The easement also gives the district authority and ability to work with the fee owners to conduct water quality improvements and natural areas restoration work within the easement areas. That will include wetlands, shoreline, and woodlands within the conservation area. Also, through the semi-annual inspections or reporting to the fee owners, the district can use its technical expertise to guide management and maintenance, which will be funded by the fee owners. While many of the conservation areas are of good or high quality, there exist opportunities to improve the overall ecology of the property with invasive species management and the establishment of native plant communities to provide filtration and nutrient uptake, improved erosion control and stabilization of steep slopes, and to diversify the plant community and structure for better habitat overall. The city's Conservation Design Planning Development Ordinance also requires the dedication of easements for the city's construction of trails to provide public use benefits. The 2 trail easements through the conservation areas will be conveyed to the city for their construction and maintenance of public trails within the conservation area. They're shown here in red and purple. The northern trail, shown in red, will bring trail users from a trailhead on Parkview Drive or further east on the existing roadway, Outlet J, shown in brown there. The trail will run through some upland woodlands along the north side of that roadway to a high point above School Lake and then around a small wetland. The more southerly trail corridor, shown in purple, will come along the wetland K, or Outlet K there, which is a tamarack bog and shrub swamp. Come along the eastern boundary of that up to a small woodland area in the southern part of the property and around a small wetland in the southeastern portion of the property. The indemnification agreement that we're seeking authorization to execute obligates the city to protect and restore the conservation area adjacent to the trail during their construction and maintenance of the public trail, and obligates the city to monitor trail use over time, and also obligates the city to indemnify the district for any occurrences or claims related to trail use. Given these significant public benefits, the existing high-quality condition of the property due to Mr. Marks' stewardship, and the opportunities available to the district to further connect this conservation corridor, staff is seeking authorization to execute the conservation easement with non-material changes and on the advice of council, to delegate decision authority to the district administrator under those easement terms, to execute the memorandum of understanding between the district and the city of Medina for easement enforcement, and to execute the agreement between the district and the city of Medina establishing the city's responsibility to indemnify the district for claims relating to the public trails within the conservation area. I can take any questions you have.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18-048?
So moved.
Manager Becker, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, questions or thoughts? Manager Becker?
What kind of trails are allowed?
The city intends to construct crushed granite trails, pervious trails. The Deer Hill Preserve easement, or conservation easement, that trail ended up being bituminous trail, but in this case, the city is looking to do crushed granite trails.
And can these trails be used by snowmobiles and four-wheel drive vehicles?
And to record, no, these are all non-motorized trails.
Thank you. I noticed in the conservation easement itself that there is a recitation of conservation values and it refers to climate change, which I think is new. I don't recall reading that before, so I like that.
That is new, that's correct.
Is that our language or theirs?
Manager Shackleton, I believe that was our language addition.
It allows for some evolution there. Any other questions? We're adopting this trio of documents and delegating a decision authority under those terms to the district administrator. We've had a motion and second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like we have Michael Pressman in the audience. Might want to say something.
Thank you.
Madam President, managers, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I just wanted to zoom out in time for you.
Could I ask you to give your name and address just for the record?
I'm Michael Pressman. I run a consulting company called Conservation Solutions. I live in Excelsior.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
This is, I think, the third time that district staff have looked at this project. The first time was about 13 years ago when I was working with the district and we explored the district buying an easement from the Marxes. We floated a beginning price of maybe $500,000 and went pretty far, and that wasn't the right time for the Marxes. Years later, Mark Tenike looked at it, and it wasn't the right time for the district. And then more years went on, and the Marxes needed to plan for their future. And what they did was they used the engine of the city's CDPUD vehicle to provide the density bonus to pay for putting the land in easement. So what was maybe a $500,000 or $1 million easement, we don't know, we never valued it, is now free because of the way that the city's PUD ordinance is. And so I want to thank you for doing it on behalf of the Marxes, and also encourage you to think about the rest of the lake. So first Petrucci, now Marx, there's more opportunity for you there. So appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whisker, for pointing that out. Item 11.3, Resolution 18-049, authorization to contract with OPG3 for Laserfish. Kathy Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam President, managers. This is kind of a follow-on to the discussion we had earlier during the OPC meeting. OPG3 is the vendor that provides our Laserfish contract and our Laserfish licenses. That is up for renewal. The contract and our licenses expire in June, and we have to redo that. Historically, we purchased 29 licenses. Those 29 licenses are utilized by members of the staff. In addition to the board, I think each member of the board has a license as it currently stands. Due to that and the numbers that we have on our staff, we have multiple people on staff using generic accounts. So department accounts and multiple people logging into those accounts, which has put us in violation of our licenses with Laserfish. They acknowledge that, they know that, and they want it fixed. They're kind of at the drawing line right at the moment where they're like, we need to come into compliance with our license agreement, which I wholeheartedly agree with. I think we need to modify. So what I have in front of you this evening is that modification, which continues the 29 licenses that we've purchased and the continual software assurance program that we purchase every year, which is basically our tech support and updates and upgrades. In addition, this contract and this proposal has on it a package of what we call participant licenses. And the intent was to move the managers on to the participant licenses, which would give you view permissions and visibility over the items that are in Laserfish, but doesn't give you the ability to upload and to put the documents in, but you could go in there. So if you were utilizing the Laserfish function to review the board packets, you could continue to do that. based off of what I heard earlier in the committee meeting, it does not sound like anybody on the board is utilizing that function right at the moment of Laserfish, and there may be no need to purchase those participant licenses at this point. Maybe something we wish to reevaluate down the road, depending on how we utilize in the IT plan into the future, how we utilize Laserfish. But I leave that to the board for that decision, but based on what I heard earlier, we may not have a need to purchase those licenses, which would be a savings from the quote that you have in the package, would be a savings of $1,467.30 off of the total. I do have on here the other thing that is new for this year that we normally don't do is the 20 hours of basically support. And that will help us realign the licenses that we currently have. And as I discussed at the meeting, kind of realign kind of our reports and train new staff. As the main person who knew how to utilize and function and really work Laserfish has hit her last day of employment with the district, and we need to train some new people on how to really utilize the system so we can fully implement it. So that is the intent of the 20 hours, is to kind of be that start of that process. That if you have any questions in regards to it based on our discussion that we had earlier during the OPC or the information I've presented to you now, like I said, I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. May I first have a motion to adopt Resolution 18049?
So
Manager Shekelin, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognes? And you have a question, Manager Olson?
Do our 7 solve the problem with licenses?
If I have the 7 licenses back from the board, I have enough to give 1 license per staff member. And as long as we don't enlarge our staff, I think I have 2 left over and I'll have 2 extra. So as long as we don't enlarge too much larger, we're covered.
do you want an amendment to the
Consider
motion?
mine in the minutes.
So is there any member of the board who is currently using Laserfish to access board packets?
No.
And everyone says no. Is there anyone who would be unwilling to give up their license?
No.
Nobody's unwilling.
You
You want to make a motion?
Do you want a motion, or is this sufficient direction, do you think?
I think that's sufficient direction that we can take that out of it unless you want to formally amend the resolution. I think we have it in there and we can remove those participant licenses from the process.
Manager Becker?
You're going to use the licenses to serve other staff members?
Yes, Manager Becker, I will take the licenses that are currently assigned to each of the board members and reassign those licenses to staff members.
So
And
better not take it out of the motion, or you won't be able to buy them.
yeah, I'm not taking the participant licenses. The participant licenses that I was proposing to buy was strictly to provide the board with continued access to Laserfish. So we can remove the participant licenses from the ongoing. We will continue to have our 29 licenses in place that we have purchased, kind of the overarching license, and then we just continually every year need to purchase the software program that gives us the updates and technical support for those licenses.
Thank you for the correction.
Manager Loftus?
Just a quick question based on, how this just came up organically, right? Telling me that we didn't need the license. Are the licenses for people who are uploading or just using? And does every employee need a license? I recall, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, the people who are uploading information need certain licenses. Just to view it and search it doesn't require. So I'm just curious if you've asked your 29 staff members, is everyone using this? Does everyone need it? For what functions? Kind of like you did tonight, and you got maybe a response that was just, we've made assumptions that we're all using it, and we're telling you, hey, we're not. Curious if you've run through that exercise with your staff.
Manager Loftus, I have not queried each staff member in my calculations and what I look at, we, like our seasonal field assistants, I'm not including them in a full license. We have already purchased 29 full licenses, and so those continue with no additional cost other than the software, basically the annual assurance program, the technical support, and the upgrades. The participant licenses are the more limited ones that would be the addition that would be looking at purchasing or accruing. So the 29 licenses, we have those today. That is our current status.
And you're utilizing those.
And we are utilizing all 29 of them. Some of this, and right now, whether every individual on the staff is actually fully utilizing Laserfish, I would say no, but I think in the future, as we build it out and we can use it as a records management system and kind of the overarching IT plans, I think there will be more utilization of it across the board. But as I said, we've already purchased and made the bulk payment for those 29 licenses, so those continue on at this point in time.
Are there any other questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have one question.
Go ahead.
This is a pretty small count, so I'm not proposing any change, but do these companies offer enterprise licenses where you just have one license and you allow so many users?
I'm not aware of Laserfish having that. They have their individual full licenses, which allow you to upload and view and do everything, and then they have, and that used to be the only thing that they had. So when we first purchased Laserfish, those were the only licenses that were available. They have just started using these participant licenses, which allow you to view and offering those. I am not aware that they have any kind of enterprise license available.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to item 13.1, the administrator's report. Mr. Wisker.
White managers, a brief one today. We'd already, President White, through the President's report, had informed the board that the Joint Working Group and the Blake Road Subcommittee met yesterday to interview potential master developers for the 325 Blake Road site. The interviews were excellent. It was a very informative set of presentations that we received. And as President White mentioned, there'll be a recommendation coming forward on March 24th. My only additional note here is to commend Mike Kamen on getting us to this point. We got the site and we acquired the site as a district in 2011, and he's put a lot of effort in between now and then to get us to where we are. A lot of effort in process design with the board and board liaisons and Lewis Smith and the city, drafting the RFQ and refining that and getting it out, the informational meetings for the proposers, collaborating with city staff, and then just a tremendous amount of organization I think that went into yesterday's successful, so I wanted to thank him for his efforts. The only other thing that I have is update on Lake Level Creek discharge, since it's spring and that's a concern for folks downstream and on the lake. The lake is currently at 929.4. We're discharging about 100 cubic feet per second into the creek. And I was informed yesterday by Tiffany, who keeps track, our local almanac, that April 2018 was the snowiest on record. Since we've started keeping records, we've received 26.1 inches of snow. That's 23 inches above the annual average. And that's a record. The record snowfall previous to that was 1965, 1967, and those ranked lower, obviously, and they actually caused spring flooding. And so we continue, I think, with the proactive management of the dam and forecast timing of the melt and what's coming from the upper watershed to really effectively manage the water balance between the lake and the creek. And we've had some discussions internally, and I'll put on your radar. I'm not going to say all that again. We're going to put on your radar that we're working on a communications package, a handout that really starts to articulate and ground on our website too, what goes into dam operations and all of the forecasting and where that comes from with National Weather Service and how we're effectively communicating to communities. So I just wanted to make note of that. Had another, in one form or another, record-breaking set of precipitation and effectively managed flow into the creek to not have flooding.
Yeah.
Benjamin Miller?
The 65 flood was the reason for the organization of the Watershed District, but it really had nothing to do with the amount of snowfall. It was the bridges in Minneapolis caused ice dams and flooded the neighborhoods. Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of damage done. The city solved most of the problems by raising the bridges and reconfiguring the roadways along the creek, so they wouldn't have those ice dams again. But the ice flow, it was like several feet thick. It was just unbelievable. They had the pictures that historic have been presented show the National Guard with tanks breaking up the ice on the streets to permit the water to flow again. But however, in '65 there was a huge flood on the Mississippi River, which flooded towns all up and down the Mississippi.
I believe the term that our engineer taught us was frazzle ice, when those bridges were backing up. Is that correct?
That's a technical term, but yes.
Thank you. And it packed up tight right there at each bridge.
Thank you for the history lesson. Context is important. Anything else? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, there's one more thing I think that I forgot to mention, sorry.
All right,
Are
we'll
we
add
allowed
to that.
re-adjourn?
Unadjourned.
Lewis had just given me a head nod. I think we discussed this very briefly at the beginning of the committee meeting, and maybe Lewis can articulate where we are with the Carver Master Finance Agreement, but just the particulars of the statute and how we'll be able to accommodate our arrangement with Carver County. We're looking to bring that to a close, and I think both Lewis and I thought it'd make sense to inform the board of the current status and how that's actually going to work in practice.
Mr. Smith?
Managers, in these discussions with Carver County, the idea is for the 6-mile subwatershed projects that Carver County ultimately would be the long-term financing authority through issuing bonds. And you have a short-term financing mechanism that you're issuing an RFQ for. There would be arrangements similar to perhaps what you've done with Wells Fargo Bank in other settings. The issue that's been the barrier to agreement with Carver County has been the county's desire to deal with the unlikely event of the district defaulting and being insolvent. It wants some assurance that if it issues the bonds, that the district not only promises to pay, but will go ahead and levy the taxes to make sure that the payment is forthcoming. That is beyond what we've been asked of by other partners, but it also, I think, is a manageable issue. So the concern that we had was levying that tax to pay off those bonds, triggering a new public hearing requirement and creating confusion and duplication in terms of process for your regular public hearing processes for your budget and levy. So we've worked with staff and with counsel for the county, and I think arrived at what we think is a workable solution that addresses the district's need to make sure that you provide good public process for your commitments, but also don't create confusion with additional duplicative process. So essentially what we would do is use both your public hearing process to order projects and then your annual budget and review process to make sure the public is tracking exactly where you are and that you have a sound legal record for your decisions, for your financing, and for how your debt service is addressed. So now when you would go forward and are ready to order a project in Carver County in this 6 Mile Creek subwatershed, you would notice a hearing, you would advertise the nature of the project, the estimated cost, and how you would prepare to fund it, including how the funding obligations would be allocated to both Carver and Hennepin County. We would also suggest that you propose and identify and let the public know at that time how this financing mechanism would work, which is that you would order the project, that you would use a short-term financing mechanism, that within 3 years or so, you would bundle similar projects, and at that point, Carver County would issue longer-term debt, and that at that point, when the bonds are issued prior to delivery of those obligations and your signing of your note to Carver County, you would certify a tax levy for taxes to pay the entire debt of those bonds with the predicted interest. So the key is that you really trigger this obligation when you decide to order the project. And you just let the public know that you have these financing mechanisms in place with Carver County that you will ultimately address. When it comes time then to, say the projects are bundled, you have debt issued by Carver County and you're about to sign a note with Carver County, you would, at a regular board meeting, on your agenda, have a resolution for consideration that would certify the tax levy that would be for the projects, just like you had told the public and made a public record about in your earlier hearings. And that levy would be certified, the certificate would come back to both county auditors, and there would also be a mechanism which is provided in the bonding statutes for payment to be directed and remitted directly to Carver County. You wouldn't have had intended other use of that money anyway, so that's not really a big issue. Then, as you will have these debt service obligations to pay Carver County and having levied that tax, in your annual budget and levy process, you will always, like you did earlier in the committee meeting, acknowledge where you stand with your debt service obligations. And you will account for that each year in your budget and in the total levy that you issue. And the public will be noticed and engaged in that process as well. So each year, the public will track where you are in your debt service obligations. But the fundamental issue of triggering that obligation by ordering the substantive project, you will have done through your individual hearing on that project with new, more detail added, both as to your record and your consideration and for the public's information about how this financing mechanism is going to work. So we think that meets the requirements of the watershed law. We believe that Carver County will be satisfied with that arrangement, and that'll allow you to move forward to wrap up this master financing agreement.
Madam President,
Manager Miller, thank you, Mr. Smith.
how do we make sure that Carver County pays the debt? That, you know, that they're worried about us serving our obligation. It seems kind of far-fetched that we wouldn't, but how do we know that they won't declare bankruptcy and let the debt be unpaid, or use debt for some roads or the debt payment for road improvements or something like that? I mean, it seems far-fetched, but it's no more far-fetched than what they're attributing possibility in the future for us to service our obligation.
Madam President, Manager Miller, those and similar questions have occurred to me, and I have raised some of them with counsel for Carver County. At some point, I think, really maybe sometime quite long ago, this really is about two governmental partners that want to get something done together and can operate on promises and trust and have mechanisms in place for assurance. We'd be happy to spend more time and effort to deal with that assurance. I understood it also as a rhetorical question, but it's been put to Carver County.
Thank you. Manager Shackleton.
I should know the answer to my question, but to what extent is our agreement with Hennepin County on their issuance of debt and our covering the, to what extent is our agreement with Hennepin County written out and spelled out and ratified by the two organizations?
It's total agreement and contracts
and I guess the
notes.
The analog is, why would we not do something very similar with Carver and answer these questions that they're asking and answer your rhetorical questions in black and white?
Well, the simple facts are that that one staff person has a concern that is not, wouldn't be shared by anybody else in a similar position, but we have to accommodate them because.
Sure.
But
I mean, I think.
I don't mind accommodating them as long as they found a good solution, but it's, you know, it's, I want to commend our council and their bond council and our staff for coming up with a solution that seemed to be unsolvable a few months ago, but it's been solved. But
Okay.
I just wanted to ask a question that, you know, is kind of equal to their concern.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now may I adjourn? Meeting's adjourned.
Nice work.